Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Couple of Nukes. As always, I'm your host, Mr. Whiskey, and this is not like your traditional episodes where I went somewhere and handpicked a guest. This was a guest was thrown at me, as you can see. Well, I guess if you're listening, you can't see, but Whiskey Lynn is our guest today, and as you know, I'm Mr. Whiskey, so. She actually reached out to me. I love a woman with drive and actually takes that initiative. So she reached out to me and said it's meant to be. And so here she is. So I have to ask you, Ms. Lynn, I always get asked, is that a military fanatic? Is it a drink preference? What is it? So I have to ask you, you know, whiskey, why did you choose that? Is that your drink preference, or is that just like that Texas gal kind of spirit?
No, actually, it was my if you hear the dog, ignore the dog. It was my drink of choice. And I earned that name. I gave it to myself, but it's actually my biker name. It's my road name.
Oh, okay.
Um, I gave it to myself almost 20 years. Can you hear him?
I can. So that I mean, there is a dog for
Just,
everyone paying attention. I mean,
he
I
just started. If you give me 2 seconds,
I have
I
my
will
dog. She
let him
just
in and
doesn't
it's
make
fine.
any noise.
2 seconds. Welcome to the real world, right? I'm all about authenticity, and there you go. No, he
Yeah.
probably, as soon as I started talking, he's like, "Oh, I should be in there." So, yeah, to answer your question, I earned it. I earned it. My name was whiskey because that was my drink of choice. I was a alcoholic, am an alcoholic. I've been dry and sober for 8 months now. But the name stuck, and I've just been using it the whole time. And it's kind of funny because I actually have watched the video and saw you explain how you got your name and that you just chose it out of the clear blue sky, right?
Yeah.
I chose mine. The way I explain it now is I basically name myself after my demon, right? So that goes into a whole different conversation now that I quit drinking, right? And everybody's like,
Yeah.
"Well, are you going to keep it? Are you going to get rid of it?" I'm like, "Oh no, it's still, that is what made me who I am. It's who I am really, and I had to learn to make friends with that demon, right?
Right.
It's not separate from me. And even I've been sober for 8 months and I still have to own that part of me, right? And it ended up being that's the part that's center stage right now is whiskey, right? So
Right.
it's funny how it all worked out. There's no mistakes, but yeah, it's still my road name and now it's my
Okay.
um what's the
S-
word I'm looking for?
Speaker,
It's my speaker name and my
stage
oh,
name,
that one too for my writing though. It's not
pen
Ghost
name,
Pen, but whatever it's called.
your
Yeah.
pen name, like your author
Yeah,
name.
my
Yeah.
pen name. There you go.
But yeah, taking the words out of my mouth of as far as like it's your demon, but first off,
Mhm.
congratulations on the 8 months. I
Thank you.
booyah, keep up the good work. That's awesome. But I was gonna say it's like just like Batman. I think most listeners, hopefully y'all know who Batman is. And he donned the bat because that's who he was fighting against, so to speak. So it's like you're Batman, only you're Whiskey Lynn. And I like
That's
I like the
it.
Lynn part smooth it flows smoothly off the tongue. I gotta ask though, was it any specific type of whiskey or was all whiskey was fair game?
Um, Jim Beam was my preference, but depending on the mood and the amount I was drinking after the first two, it didn't matter. But I will say, yeah, it didn't matter what liquor it was after the first two or three. But I will say as I got older, my preference stayed and I started drinking more top shelf stuff. So my whiskey preferences grew with me, right? And then eventually I had to own the fact that it wasn't serving me anymore. Or
Right.
it wasn't serving, I wasn't willing to let it serve me the way it was anymore. That's the more true statement.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, and that ties into my life as well as what you do. I come from a domestic violence household where there was a lot of codependency, financial bondage, trauma bonding, a lot of stuff. So a lot of stuff that you speak on, I actually have read a lot of articles about, seen a lot of speakers talk about it because of my mother's situation. As I've said before on a lot of shows, half her face is made out of metal because my dad broke her skull, and that was
Mhm.
actually part of that tactic to keep her under fear and rule. The financial bondage is a big one, using kids to uh, also kind of bond people, because now you got the kids. So I have a lot of history with that, and also the alcoholism. That's something my father is still battling, something that has really affected my life, something that also affected the domestic violence in the house a lot too. You know, I think that the bigger thing we see nowadays is obviously there's still a lot of alcoholism and drug use, um, but now there's a lot more psychological manipulation, gaslighting, as we've coined it, which I don't know how long that term's been around, but I only discovered it about a year or two ago. Gaslighting is a big one, and codependency is a big word. So, Ms. Whiskey Lynn, I'd love for you to get into what exactly you talk about and what you're here to do and who you're here to serve.
Absolutely. And do you know where gaslighting came from, the term?
No, no, I'm not familiar at all.
I know where the term came from.
Well, that's great. I'd love
It
to know.
was in the 1800s, and there was a guy who was psychologically abusing his wife. And what
Mm.
he would do is um, what he would do was they had oil lamps back then, and he would turn the oil lamp down. And she was like, "Is there something wrong with the lamps? The lighting is really weird in here." And he's like, "No, there's nothing wrong with the lighting. It must be you."
Mm.
Right.
Wow.
And it was literally that brainwashing of, no, there's nothing wrong. There's something wrong with you. No, there's nothing wrong. There's something wrong with me, you. And he did it to the point that he drove her crazy. And back then the rules and
Right.
laws were different about insane asylums and what you could do with your wives and everything else. And that's where gaslighting came from. It was literally because of a gaslight, and he drove her nuts over that gaslight. That's what gaslighting is, right?
Wow. I would have
Inflicting that on the
never.
other person and then turning it over on them and blaming it on them also.
Right. I would have never guessed that. It's funny
Hmm.
because there is playful gaslighting too, which I would call that more like just I would call it a different term. But I remember my buddy texted me last night. He was like, my fiance is gaslighting me. I was like, what do you mean? He goes, well, I asked her if she could clean up everything in the bathroom. And then I went on my phone and then she never moved. And then the whole bathroom was clean. And then she was telling me that I cleaned it. And I don't remember cleaning it. I think she's gaslighting me. And she was just messing with him because he's easy to mess with. And she convinced him that he got up and cleaned the bathroom, not her. And he's like, wait, but I haven't moved the couch. But what's
Well,
interesting is a
it's a
guest of
prime
mine,
example of how easy it is,
right?
right? If we're
Especially with
not
everyone
aware of our
buried in
own
their
thoughts.
phones. And
Hmm.
because people are so distracted, we live in such a
Yep.
distracting environment that people don't know, stress. And that's why it's easy too when you are a mom. It happens most to women because you're taking care of the kids, you're taking care of the house, or if you're working a job, you got the job, you have all these other things going on and you get stressed. If you're not sleeping a lot, that affects your cognitive ability. But it's
Hmm.
interesting on this one ship in the military in the United States Navy, they call it pickling. And I don't remember the origin of that. I think it had to do with the guy's last name. I don't know if his last name was Pickle, but they call it pickling instead of gaslighting. They're like, you're pickling me. So that's just an
Hmm.
interesting little side note there. But Ms. Lynn, I'd love for you to get into how you talk about gaslighting and the reality of it to help empower women and men who are in those situations.
Oh, by all means. And you can just call me Whiskey. It's fine. You don't have to go with the Lynn. Just Whiskey is fine. I'm a
I,
one word person.
Okay, I mean, I'll try. It's just I'm Mr. Whiskey, and
No,
then my dog is a little whiskey shot, and I don't want her to keep popping her head up on screen every time I say the
oh,
word.
gotcha.
You know?
Either one is fine, but most people I just go by Whiskey. But from my own background and the things I've had to teach myself, and all the years of therapy and all the other stuff, I had to learn how to break my patterns of my codependency and take full accountability for what I've done in my life because of my wounds. And that's not victim shaming, right? It's because perpetrators are perpetrators and people are going to do what they do, but it's understanding, like when we're children, we don't have a choice about what's happening to us, right? But once we get to be an adult and we understand what had happened to us, it's incumbent upon us as adults to heal those wounds and to acknowledge those things and to not to continue inflicting harm on ourselves and other people, right? Because somebody who's wounded can cause just as much harm as somebody who's wounding. Does that make sense?
Of
Because we're
course.
reacting instead of healing this stuff. So what I do essentially is people reach out to me and I help them identify those patterns and those things that they carry through their life and through their social life and family dynamics and everything else, and teach them what they could do to break the patterns, create new habits, create new cycles, develop new relationships, first of all, with themselves, because at 99% of the time, it has something to do with your personal inner relationship and not the relationships outside. Once you change this, the rest of it kind of melts itself away. You still have to do the work with some people, but for the most part, once you learn boundaries and all those things, it all changes, right? So that's what I do is I teach, it's mainly women, but there's been some men in there. Teach them how to identify those patterns and to change those things. And a lot of these women are still in these relationships when they reach out to me. So there have been, just in the last year, there have been dozens and dozens of women who have changed the codependency and the trauma bonds and all these things that they've worked on. And a lot of them end up leaving these relationships. And that's exactly what happened to myself. And I was coaching all these women when I realized I was helping somebody and I realized that I was preaching to the choir, right? I was talking to
Mm,
her and looking at my own marriage, and I'm like, oh, there's a problem here,
right.
right? So then I had to break those things inside me even more, and I literally had to I escaped my own marriage last year. So, and then once I and it was very public. A lot of people knew what was going on. It was all over Facebook
Mm,
and like groups and stuff like that because I my theory is recover loudly so other people don't die quietly.
mm,
So
okay.
all of my stuff has been out in the open while I'm doing this process, while I'm healing, I spent 10 months homeless on the road on a Harley last year. Because when I left,
Wow.
I had no destination, no plan, no goal, no nothing. I just knew I had to get out. And that turned into this huge thing. Like it's just amazing. But it was stressful at the time. But because I was doing it publicly, all these other people are like, oh, well, if she can, and I've gotten messages from people who are like, well, if this bitch can do it, I can do it. Right. And because I've stood up and done it publicly, other people are like, oh, well, I could do this privately. I don't have to do it on Facebook, but I can save myself.
Right.
Right. So it's been giving incentive to other people to change their life and step out. And then, like, I know you work with military PTSD. I'm actually diagnosed with complex PTSD and conversion disorder, which I don't know if you know what that is. A lot of people don't.
No, but I know that Miss Whitney, who is sometimes on the show with me, she took a
Hmm.
PTSD test, not for, combat or military PTSD, but just for PTSD in general, for, anxiety for relationships and family, because of some of the stuff that's happened
Hmm.
with her family and relationships. So I don't know specifically what you're talking about, but I do know there are PTSD tests out there for just the psychological aspect, because a lot of people think military when they think PTSD, but in general, it's just a traumatic event that is still tormenting someone mentally, that is affecting them physically as well. It affects you physically. Your brain and your body are in sync, and if your brain is not healthy, your body's not healthy. If your mind
Hmm.
is thinking about these things, I had there was a woman who witnessed a suicide firsthand of her roommate, and I remember every time she went home, she was afraid to open the door, because last time
Hmm.
she opened the door, there was a dead body in there.
Right.
I've seen psychological stuff like that. But even in relationships, some of the women I've dated have expressed that they are too afraid to say no because their father would scream at them. They lived in a household where no, or they were in a relationship with a different partner where no wasn't an answer, wasn't an option, you know?
Yep.
Or I've had women where if I talk any slightly louder, they think that I'm yelling at them, they're not going to scream because they had a relationship or with a husband or a boyfriend or a father where that, they would yell. That was just like a thing in their household, and it traumatized them. I've had women who believe they can't cry because of the way they were
Hmm.
treated. So there's a lot of different types of PTSD and trauma out there.
Right. And see, that's one of the reasons I wanted to reach out and speak to you is because you were speaking on the military portion and you had mentioned how you thought there was a connection between the domestic and the PT and the military. And
Right.
I 100% agree with what you were saying, and I'm going to elaborate that on if I may.
Of course.
Um, and let me differentiate this really fast. Because I was diagnosed by Vanderbilt University. Well, no, I was first diagnosed by another doctor 10 years earlier with standard PTSD, and I didn't treat it. I'd had it for years
Mm.
and years and years, and I went 10 years diagnosed and didn't treat it. Okay. Big no no. Let me just say to anybody who's got a diagnosis that has not treated it, get help now because it's gonna come back to bite you in the butt. So it came back, bit me in the butt, right? And Vanderbilt University in Nashville actually did my second diagnosis, which was complex PTSD. Standard PTSD is a traumatic event that affects you after
Okay.
90 days.
Mm.
Okay. So it's you didn't get over it. 90 days later, you're still having flashbacks. You're still having all the issues. It's still making drastically affecting your life. That's the standard definition for PTSD.
Okay.
Complex PTSD is multiple different traumatic events, generally that progress over time.
Right.
Uh, Captivity is one, which is one of the things like you said with ladies, domestic is complex PTSD is in domestic a lot because like you're raised in your house. You feel like you're a captive because you can't say no. You can't get out. You're a child. You're young. Some marriages, the husband won't he controls all the money. She can't get out of the house. She has zero freedom to make her own choices. And it's not just women. Let's just do that disclaimer now. So that is complex PTSD when there's multiple traumatic events that go on over time and there's an element of choice that's taken away. Like standard PTSD, for example, military, a bomb goes off, something happens, it's a single event, that's it. And there
Right.
was no other interaction with it, right? It's just the event itself. Complex PTSD is this long drawn out something else and repeated events. Okay. And conversion disorder is essentially it's shell shock. You learned about shell shock in high school.
Yeah, of
So
course.
World War One or World War Two, when warfare changed, and we ended up with big guns, big bombs, chemical warfare, all this different stuff. The soldiers and the military men were not trained or accustomed to that. It was a whole different level of disparity of humanity, right?
Right.
And brains broke. And that's what happened to me. The brain breaks. It gets so stressed to a point where it doesn't know what to do, so it shuts down. And so if you ever saw videos of shell shock back in the 30s and 40s, they had tremors, they couldn't stand up, they couldn't speak, had all this crazy, nasty stuff happen to them. That's exactly what happened to me when my conversion kicked in. And what it and now it's called functional neurological disorder. Why they made it a crazy, stupid, long name, beyond me. I
Right.
just use conversion. Um, but what it is the physical manifestation of psychological stress. So
Mm.
it's literally a coping mechanism because my body and other people's brains have learned to we had to filter through such a high level of stress that our brain didn't know what to do. So it started coming out physically.
Right. The big
So
question then, the big
yes, sir.
question I gotta ask before we get too dark is
Mhm.
this a type of brain damage that is irreparable or can it be fixed? Because that's the thing everyone's gonna want to know.
Um, for myself personally, I've had to do it individually. It has not been the system that has helped me, right? And
Right.
domestic PTSD doesn't get the acknowledgement that military even does anymore. Yeah, at this point, right? We're still working on that. And that's one of the
Right.
reasons I was like, I need to talk to Mr. Whiskey because you have a platform and I have a platform and this is we're in
Right.
the same war, right? We just came from different battlefields.
Right.
So I don't have the tremors or any of that stuff. I used to have speech issues, stutter issues, all kinds of stuff. It was really, really bad 9 years ago. I've had to be very, very intentional. I've had to be very, very accountable to myself. I have to have very strong boundaries. I had to learn to say no because if I push my stress too far, my tremors show up.
Right.
So I have almost no tremors now, but it's because I have had to build my world and create my space to a point that this can't happen and this can't happen. And I have hardline rules, right? I'm very judicious about who my friend circles are. I'm, I still have all the PTSD things going on too. I still have the hypervigilance. I still am working with the anxiety and all that. But all of that has been so intentional in building those tools. It's completely treatable slash curable, but you have to figure out what works for you. And I think that's why the
Right.
system's missing it, because it's based on the individual person. Like, and
Right.
that's what I do is I coach people to identify these things within themselves. It crosses both lines
Right.
between the domestic stuff and PTSD.
Right.
So
And
does that,
also, I have my opinions, right? Everyone can have their own opinion, but the system is also very consumerism based, very push medicine, big pharma, right?
it's
And
sick
so
care. It's
that's
not
one of
health
the
care.
things. Right. And I actually had an episode on PTSD, and the VA basically, when PTSD after 9/11 first really came back, right? We spoke about how the Vietnam veterans kept it all to themselves, really. Like we knew about PTSD, but it wasn't that big of a deal
Hmm.
publicly. After 9/11 and then Desert Shield and all that stuff, it was a little more public. And Kenshin Ra came on the show and he spoke about how the VA just pumped out drugs. It was like he could go there, pick any drugs he wanted, and he could have them. And he ended up a pill addict and homeless. And I
Hmm.
spoke to him about what you said, how shell shock came about, where when the military advanced, when warfare changed, I spoke about the unnaturalness, these
Hmm.
reactions that we're having. It is a psychological thing. It is a because our bodies are made and we're designed to protect ourselves from natural things, but the noises, the chemicals, the lighting from all these man-made weapons and technology are different. They affect us differently. And so that's part of the reason why it's hard to find a natural drug, a natural chemical, because it's all psychological. Now, you talked about the captor, the being captive kind of PTSD, and I actually grew up in a household where my father was a narcissistic tyrant, and the world was dangerous. Leaving the city is dangerous. Leaving the house is dangerous. You're not really allowed
Hmm.
to have friends. I remember I left the house one time to see a girl, of course, and
Of
he
course.
came out there in a cop car, hunted me down, and even to this day, whenever I was doing homework with my sisters, my dad would walk by and yell at us to
Hmm.
sit further away from our books, that if we're too close, we're going to lose our eyesight. And he was very strict about it. And he yelled at us every day for years and anytime I'm writing something, if anyone walks behind me, I like jump. Um, I like sit up straight. It doesn't have to be my father, even. It's just if someone walks behind me, I think it's him, even though I know my father's hundreds of miles away, over 1,000 miles away,
But it's
And
embedded in our nervous system, right? And
right,
to our bodies are humans are built to live in peace and run from a bear occasionally, right? We're built to live
right,
in peace and run from a bear occasionally. But with some of us, the bear never leaves.
right.
And we were with the bear for so long. And now, like in my case, the bear's gone. But in my psyche, it's still looking for a bear because there's been a
Right.
bear there for almost 50 years,
Yeah.
So constant intentional,
Yeah.
there's no bear. There's no bear. Look at that pretty puppy. There's no bear, right? And it's having gratitude for all the other things to pull my focus off of that. And that's
Yeah.
exactly it. And the reason I brought that up was because you mentioned in one of the other videos I watched you in that,
Oh yeah, check it out.
check it out.
I don't know where it
Um,
is, but check it out.
you were talking about, actually, I think it was your ENTV video is where I saw you first. And you were talking about, hello, now I lost it. It's okay. It will come back. This is part of it,
Mhm.
right? That your brain just leaves. My brain goes black and everything leaves and it will come back. But you were talking about, there we go. You were talking about how you thought that domestic people with domestic issues were running to the military to get away from their
Right.
domestic issues, and they were going in with trauma that hadn't been healed or even identified. That's a
Yeah.
big one too. A lot of it isn't identified because if you're born and raised in it, it's what you've always known.
Yeah.
You just know
Oh,
you want
so
something different. Go ahead.
I know what I spoke on. What I actually spoke on is I had a couple episodes, specifically guest Ricky D. Schluter and Shay Sparks spoke about this, how Ricky D. Schluter grew up, whenever his dad got angry, he would smash furniture, rip it apart. And he thought everyone's dad did that, you know?
Yeah.
And I just spoke actually in my season 4 premiere. I recapped all the takeaways from the past 3 seasons. And one of the things I focused on was how our parents are our standard of normal, what's normal. And Shay Sparks and I spoke about how, a lot of people end up in toxic relationships because their parents were in one. And I harped on my generation, how I'm from the generation where everyone's parents are divorced, got married for the wrong reasons, stayed together for the kids, this and that,
Mhm.
you know. And so we end up in a lot of relationships that are unhealthy, but they're normal to us. They
Mhm.
feel comfortable to us. Actually, I had a guest on where I've talked to women and I've seen women online post about how they're uncomfortable in a healthy relationship. They're
It's
it's weird
foreign.
because they've been in an unhealthy relationship for so long. And so I've
Mhm.
talked about that conditioning and how it's normal. And one of the things I said is there's a lot of people in the military, right, who have that unresolved trauma or didn't identify, right? But also Mike Van Pelt from the True Man podcast was on my show, and he spoke about how there's a lot of people getting divorced and then getting married not too long afterward, having never resolved the first divorce, or even on a non-marriage level, just people jumping from one relationship to the next. I just gotta forget about her or him or
That's the
whatever, right?
cycle,
And
right?
that's the cycle. Yeah,
But
it,
the,
it
the
really is.
saying goes, the best way to get over somebody is to get under somebody else, which is not
Yeah.
true, right? But it's
Well,
the you use the next person as a distraction.
and I don't want to, like, I have a lot of respect for the women in the military, but I'll say this generally, a lot of them have daddy issues. A lot of
Oh yeah,
them actually go in the military because they like a man yelling at them what to do, which sounds crazy, but you know,
it
it's crazy.
doesn't.
But it's not just me who said it. A lot of military members have brought this up to me. Women in the military have brought this up to me. I sat there and I was like, that is strange. But again,
Well,
a lot of the women and men in military have a lot of trauma from before, and so with
it's
the
funny you brought
yeah,
that up because I think a lot of the men in the military are in there because they have mommy issues.
that is also true.
It's a mother
I can't
wound,
confirm or
right?
deny for myself, but
It's an
it's
overbearing
funny.
mother and they don't know what
Yeah.
to do, and it's all these things, and they're wounded masculine, right? And I
Hmm.
actually honest somebody might not agree. Everybody has their own opinion. I honestly think that the military uses that to their advantage. I
Well,
really do. And that brings in the whole yelling at you and the drill sergeant thing, right? And it's like if you already have that trauma and you already have those wounds, it's that much easier to control you in the military as staff because you're already lending yourself to that. You can't tell me they don't know that.
well, it's a yes and no on that one because at the same time, I've seen a lot of young men and women have authority issues developed in the military because they just escaped a household where they were
Yep.
being told what to do, where they were yelling at. It's like, well, oh, now you're gonna tell me what to do? I'm independent, especially most of the military. I always say about 95%. I don't have a percentage, but 18, 19, 17, even a lot of people join when they're 17, 18 and 19,
Mhm.
so of course it's that transitioning point too. The military is great but also not great because you're an adult, but you're not an adult, right? Your hand is being held, which is great in some ways, especially because the public education system is a political indoctrination machine and doesn't actually prepare people to live, and be adults.
I
So
love
it's
you so
nice to have,
much.
thank you, I appreciate it. But it's, the military is nice then because it's like, wow, you know what? Taxes are pretty easy. Well, military messed up my taxes past 2 years in a row, but typically most people don't have problems with their taxes. It's easy. We have housing. We don't have to worry about what we're gonna eat, right? A lot
Right.
of people will get their own places or make their own food, but at the end of the day, you will have a place to live, you will have food to eat, and you don't have to worry about those stresses. But then you're also, you know, when you live under someone's house, you live under their rules, right?
You're
As long as you're in my
institutionalized.
house, yeah,
You're
I'm the parent,
institutionalized.
regardless of age, I'm the parent. So
Hmm.
it's certainly a situation. And part of the issue that I've brought up in the military, as well as in in the society in general, there's no mentorship, right? Our
Hmm.
children are being raised by social media, which is a tool reflective of how you use it. You control your feed. But when you initially get on those apps, especially as a child, well, what are they initially shown? And then it goes from there.
Yeah,
Especially
who's controlling
these
their
younger
feed?
generations
Yeah.
are very porn addictive. I had a 8-year-old the other day. Well, it was 2 years ago, but the other day for me, talk to me and my military buddies. They're like, why are my friends so horny? He was talking about porn. And he was 8 years old. I know fifth graders having anal sex
Yep.
that are siblings of my friends. And it's like, that is crazy. So if that's what they're
Absolutely.
they're thinking about, what do you think their feed is going to be? And you have all
Yep.
these mostly women. That's the truth is there's not a lot of men online who have an OnlyFans or whatever, wherever they're showing their images. It's mostly women online who are, I said before,
Because women are more mental and men are more visual. So OnlyFans isn't going to work for women like it does for
right.
men. That's why women are so hell
That's
bent
a
on
great
smut
point.
novels.
That is wow. That is
Yeah,
funny that you
we
said
are
that because a
mental
lot of
images. You guys are visual images.
that's funny because
It's
even
mhm.
my neighbor, she's in her 80s, she reads all smut novels. It's
Yeah,
pretty
that's
funny.
why.
But yeah, if you go to Barnes or Nobles or Books a Million, none of these are sponsors, but they have the section, they'll have like the motorbiker with his abs out and then the low pants line, and then it's this and that, and it's always like that dream story of this bad guy. So I never realized that. I love that observation.
Yeah, so
But
that cover builds the picture and then she uses
yeah,
that picture for the rest of the book, right?
yeah,
But it's all her building the story in her head. It's
right.
not you guys don't want to think.
Eye candy.
You're
Yeah,
just like, show me.
just show me the chest. Yeah. So
Yeah, that's
that's
exactly
very
how it
true.
goes. I mean,
But
I mean, legit, I'm real talk, right? I'm all about
right.
authenticity and getting this stuff out there. And quite honestly, these kids, and I'm not making assumptions or accusations about your
Yeah.
friend's friend or whatever,
Yeah.
but these kids that are getting hooked into it really, really early like this, a
Hmm.
lot of it is probably because they have some kind of childhood trauma also,
Yeah.
right? And it's lending itself to it, and
Right.
then social media is feeding it, right?
Well, and that
Because
that yeah, the
the
mentorship thing is what I'm trying to focus on is
yeah,
because they have social media, they don't have parents teaching them what's right or wrong. A lot of parents are neglectful nowadays, and angry parents, I apologize, but it's not all of
but
y'all,
not
right? But there's a
intentionally.
lot of neglect, and it's because there's a lot of thrown into the technology, thrown into the void, right? And I get it.
Electronic
Homeschooling's a lot of work.
babysitters.
Monitoring your kid is a lot of work. Controlling their internet, we can barely control our own time on the internet. How many of us are doom scrolling?
Healing yourself so that you can mentor your children is a lot of work, and they
Yeah.
would rather be distracted than heal
Hmm.
themselves. And since they are not healing themselves, that's that whole generational curse thing, right? That
Yeah.
everybody talks about, oh, it's a generational curse. And then I don't honestly think it's passing down the trauma so much as it's passing down the coping mechanisms, right?
Mm.
I come from a long line of alcoholics, and so are
Right.
my children. I passed it on to my kids, and we have real
Right.
talking conversations about it now, but I had to be open and honest about where I came from and what I caused in my children, right?
Right.
And now they're in their 20s, they have to choose for themselves to heal those things too.
Right.
But it's the same thing.
Well, what we need then is to help take some of the stress and responsibility off of these parents to do it by themselves with mentorship
Mhm.
programs. But I spoke with Ms. Whitney on the season 4 premiere. I said, the issue with colleges is these guidance counselors, or even high schools, middle schools, these guidance counselors, career counselors, whatever your system has, if they even have a system, right? I mean, they're having 15 to 30 kids each, and it's like it's hard for them on top of their day job and their families at home to mentor each and every single one of these kids. In the military, I said before, your mentor is going to be the guy or gal who's getting out, who is a crap bag sailor and teaches you all the ways to avoid work or do wrong or get out. Because the people are busy. Your mentors are too busy, and you're kind of just thrown to the side. So that's the big issue, right? And so it's hard for people to heal from traumas or avoid traumas at a young age or even into young adulthood because they're not having this available. And there are, this new generation has access to all these podcasts and movies and documentaries and books that a lot of the
Hmm.
older generations didn't have, but it's also like just knowing they're out there being actually reaching that audience, you know. And it
And
takes a long time. Like you're a clear example of that. It could take a long time to even realize this. But it
mhm.
helps when you have an outside party. You had to realize yourself. But because of people like you who are going out there, you're helping people realize from an outside perspective, a neutral perspective, this is the reality of it. You have to help people see. But part of the issue with that, the rose-tinted glasses, as we call them, you talked about the wounded hurting people because the truth is, when you're talking to a woman or a man and you're like, hey, your relationship is unhealthy, this is bad, what are they going to be? Defensive of what they
Mhm.
care about. Even if they don't care about it, it's not easy for a woman like my mom to say, well, there goes 20 years of my life, sometimes more, sometimes less, even just a year, 3 years, especially when you're younger, you're like, that could have been the best 3 years of my life. You're telling me I'm gonna just throw it all away? Like I am sticking with this person. Like I've made this commitment, I've invested, like we're doing this.
Well, let me tell you, 2 days ago, a woman that I've been working with for the last 7 months, and she's had other people in her support team. It's not just me, obviously, but she got on a one-way flight the other day and she left a 38-year marriage. 38
Wow.
years. Right?
And it's
It's
not
not
easy.
impossible. But we always say I have to see it to believe it, and that's not true. We have to believe it to see it. And that's why I do what I'm doing out loud.
Amen.
That's why I'm living out loud because these women have seen that, oh, well, if she can do it, I can do it too. Right? Because they're believing it before they're seeing it now. And I actually said something to a friend of mine last night about that, because I still struggle with things and I'm still working on things. It could be a
Right.
lifetime battle because the more I heal, the more that comes up, right? It's never ending, but I get
Yeah.
through it faster now because I have the tools in place. So it's not as stressful to heal from it as it was. But some people are like, you're such a rock star, and everybody's like, you have such a hard life and you've done all this stuff. And I'm like, they don't know who I was 9 years ago when I crashed and burned, right? They don't know who
Mm.
I was before I crashed and burned and how bad it had gotten then, you know. So for right now, I could look at myself and say, yeah, I'm healed. Look at how I used to be. I mean, that's never going to stop for me because growing is my passion, but it's being real with people and talking to them and saying, no, I've been in the dirt. I've been in those trenches. I know what it looks like firsthand. Like the levels of my traumas are pretty extreme and there's a lot of them, but in my mind, God put that on me. If I wouldn't have lived and survived through all the things that I've survived through, I wouldn't be able to be that light for other people, right? I'm grateful now in my healing process that I went through all those things because those things created who I am. Those things created whiskey, right? Being an alcoholic created the minister named Whiskey who doesn't drink,
Mm.
right? Which is just hilarious now. I think I'm like, it's
Well,
a
yeah,
big joke
it's I
now.
chuckle too because um people have asked for my origin story or to do a solo episode, and it's funny because I was gonna call the episode "Making Whiskey," like how do you make whiskey or something like that, like you said, making whiskey. Um,
Yeah.
and it is. I am a grateful person. I do serve as a preacher every Monday on my other show, Radiating Faith, and so
Hmm.
the scripture has saved me a lot, and it has helped me be grateful because it's like either you or I would rather be who we want to be than whiskey, but it's like at the same time, now we have the power to help people, and so it is difficult because, I do I am upset with my father for the things he's done to my mother, to my sisters, to me. But at the same time, it did form the way for me to be who I am and hopefully help a lot of other people. There was a point in my life where he was trying to, I guess it was gaslighting, me into believing that I was the Antichrist and that I was the spawn of him, aka that he was Lucifer and some wild stuff. But yeah, I know what you're saying, but like looking back at where I was, and you said discovering new traumas every day, and that is the truth, honestly, because there's a lot of things that I never realized were like, hey, that's actually manipulation, or that was actually like controlling, or this wasn't being a good father. This was him trying to bribe, because a lot of things, trauma bonding is something my mother taught me that I've really noticed. It'd be like, for example, my mom was a dog trainer. We had a lot of dogs, and if my dad ended up not liking the dog, typically once they were no longer a puppy and fun, they were a responsibility. He would just kill it. He would shoot them in the backyard or whatever, and my mom would
Hmm.
cry, and then he would buy her a new one and say, "Oh, it's okay. Now we have a new puppy." That was one form, or like,
That's a cycle, right?
couples. I know a
That's
lot
a
of
cycle.
couples. I know a lot of couples have they'll break up, get back together, have a bunch of sex, and that's how they're trauma bonding because they're physically, intimately bonding with each
It's love
other.
bombing.
Yeah, love. That's another one too, where
Yep, it's love
my
bombing.
father did it because when my mom met him, he was a police officer. He was Catholic man from this Catholic Irish family. Everything seemed great. He bought her stuff, dates every day, flowers all the time. And then once they were married, boom. Sometimes it's not even after marriage. Sometimes it's after a certain point in the relationship. Hey, you
Hmm.
used to write me poems every day, and now that doesn't happen. You know, and don't be mistaken, right? Because I've been accused of it, and sometimes I want some of the women out there to understand too that there's a difference between love bombing and then just like where the relationship is changing, right? There is a puppy phase, there is a honeymoon phase, right? There's different
But
levels of
love
it.
bombing
So
is a repeated cycle.
yeah, so if it's just like, hey, it just doesn't seem as romantic anymore, it's not as glamorous. Don't forget too that there is a, there the if you're with someone for years, right, it's not always going to be like the first few weeks when you're like, wow, this is new. But like you said, whiskey is a cycle, right? So it could also be after, right before every breakup, or right after every breakup, or every fight, this or that, and so you got to think and look, is your partner getting you flowers or going on dates um, whenever, even when it's not convenient, or is it only after a fight? Is it only after you ask? You have to look
What's
at,
the energy
analyze
involved in it?
the agenda and the energy, right? And
Hmm.
so, Whiskey, what I will ask you for some advice here for all our listeners, like, what are some of the things we should be looking for to make sure our relationship is healthy and not controlling, or, like signs of gaslighting, signs of love bombing, signs of trauma bonding, or financial bondage, or anything else, all these common tactics, like if you want to go over the common methods that these people use to hold people captive.
Well, the common ones are like love bombing, for example, and the gaslighting. Some of it is using, especially in a narcissistic relationship, if you start to stand up for yourself, they will use other people against you. So
Yep.
be careful who you tell about what you're doing. I mean, what I had to do, and it doesn't matter who the other person is. I want to put that because we've gotten this really bad dichotomy in social media now about the empaths versus the narcissists. And that's not necessarily true because you can have relationships with two narcissists. You can have a relationship with two wounded empaths, and a wounded empath can do some hellacious damage, right? It's not
Mhm.
just narcissists that run this cycle, it's just codependency, period. So, one of the things is when you start healing yourself, first of all, acknowledge that you need to heal because if you're not, and we all need to heal on some level, every person on this planet has PTSD,
Right.
right? Every American who was born before 9/11 has PTSD because we've all went through and lived the result of 9/11. On some level, we all have. You can ask most 90% of people what they were doing on 9/11, and they know exactly what happened because their brain will go right back there, right? It will
Mhm.
flash back to 9/11. We all have PTSD because of 9/11, right? So to understand that there's something there that you can fix and only you can fix. And usually when we start working on these, I mean, you can get tools and help with it, right? But the acknowledgement working on it solely on you or the individual. And when we start working on ourselves and really having boundaries and understanding what we will accept for ourselves, it will start running interference with other people. Have you ever done this where you've changed something about yourself and somebody did not like it? And
Of
part of that,
course.
yeah, part of that is because they're losing who they know you are or who they think you are, right? And some people are genuinely concerned because of a codependency issue, and some people are concerned because they lost control, right? So the reaction that somebody does while you're growing will tell you a whole bunch about them, right? If they're my ex-husband looked at me and said, "We were just fine until you found yourself." He said it right to my face.
Wow.
Yeah, we were fine until you found yourself. So I was perfect for him while I was wounded. But once I started to healing, it was a problem because I wasn't controllable, right? So pay attention to what people say around you, pay attention to energies around people, because a lot of us with wounds also have these gifts where we can understand and we can sense what's going on, right? The hypervigilance, a lot of people look at it as a curse. To me, it's a gift. I don't miss a thing. I don't miss energies in a room. I don't miss if the door's not locked. I don't miss anything,
Right.
right? And I've learned that that's my gift. I can read people. It helps me in my coaching, right? I can understand where to take coaching. Is this helping them, or do we need to go a different direction because they're not picking it up? So things like that is just understanding that all these things that have happened, they suck, but on some level, they've happened for us. What can I do to make that? I call it turning shit into sunshine. It's my own alchemy, right? What can I do to take this pile of shit and turn it into sunshine? And that's different for every person. I would love to give you a cookie cutter or something, but
Right.
it's not possible because we are not cookie cutters and all of our experiences are different. There's little T trauma and big T trauma, right? The big bomb went off. That's big trauma. That's big T trauma, right? Somebody forgot your birthday and your feelings are hurt. If you're super sensitive, that's probably little T trauma. It could be traumatic to somebody if that was meant that much to them, so it's all dependent on who the person is. So
Right.
did that answer your question, or was there more to that?
No, no, no. That's good. I'm surprised your ex-husband said that. That's like a blatant
Wake up call, right?
confession almost. Like that's
And
confirmation.
pay
Yeah.
attention. And I'm glad you said that. Pay attention because people tell you. People tell you the truth. And Maya Angelou says, when people show you who they are, believe them the first time. People will tell you who they are. And we're like, no, you're fine. That's it. Well, they're like, oh, well, I'm such and such. And you're like, no, you're not, honey. You're just fine. Women do it all the time. Men will
Hmm.
say, I'm a womanizer. I'm a this. I'm a liar. I'm an alcoholic. I'm a this. And then she's like, no, you're fine. And then she thinks she's going to fix him. Me and my friends call it Captain Save-A-Ho.
That's funny. Well, I can give the other perspective. I
Okay.
remember. Well, I've never thought of my one ex as a bad person. I do love her
And it's
dearly,
not good
but
or bad. It's just they are.
yeah. But she said, she broke up with me. She said, "You're a good person. I'm a bad person. We can't be together. You're ambitious. You have goals in life. I am just a mess." And she was a mess. She was on a whole
Hmm.
bunch of different pills. She had a lot of trips to hospital, which there's nothing wrong with that, right? She just needed the
She's
help
on
and
her journey there.
was on her
Yeah.
journey. And I wanted to be there for her during that, but she broke up with me. She said, I'm leaving you because you're a good person. I'm a bad person." I remember that hurt more than anything. I would have rather heard I'm a bad person because I can change myself. You can't change other
Right.
people, right? So how do you how do you fix a relationship when they're saying it's because you're a good person? My solution was I said, well, I'll be a bad person, of course, because I'm sitting there
And
crying,
how
and
many
I was
do
like,
that?
right. And what ended up happening is later on in life, she got super drunk, um, FaceTimed me for hours all night, and I actually was typing the whole conversation down while it was happening. So I was like, if she doesn't remember this tomorrow, I need her to remember this. And
Hmm.
you know, I think she was a bad person because she got drunk, FaceTime me, said all this stuff, confessed a lot of stuff that now she denies. But it's interesting. I felt like when she was drunk, she actually said the truth because she said a bunch of stuff that made a lot more sense. And basically seemed like we were gonna get back together. And then the next day it was like, nope. Like I was on alcohol. That's literally drugs. Like, nope, not sane. And then she was gone again. And I never thought she was a bad person, but that wasn't the nicest thing to do, you know. Um,
Right. And
like
if you have any people pleaser wounds, right, which are those Captain
I have
Save-A-Ho
a
is
lot of those.
yes, Captain Save-A-Ho is a people pleaser wound. And we feel like we feel so internally passionate about helping other people and wanting them to change, right? And what I learned is we can't change anybody. We can't control anybody, but we can be the example for them to
Mm,
follow. Right.
yeah,
And I had to learn and heal to the point where I learned that I don't have to do anything for other people. All I have to do is be me. And the people who are ready to change and want to heal will do so. And I said, I'm so glad that now I'm the lesson and not the example. Or I'm the
right,
example and not the lesson now. Because I used to be, oh, don't be that person. Right. I used to
right.
be that person. And now everybody's like, oh, well, I want to emulate you. I want to do what you're doing. And
Yeah.
that took a while to get used to because I
Mm,
wasn't used to accolades and positive feedback and hey, you're doing the right thing. And right, I had to learn it's all a self-worth thing. And the
mm,
thing with your friend there is a self-worth thing. You're bad, I'm good. No, she doesn't feel like she's worthy of your level of goodness. She doesn't see herself there. We can't force people
yeah.
to do that.
Well, and that's one of the worst things about social media. I've had a few of the women I dated said, "Well, we can't be seen in public because we're ugly and you're good looking." And I've always been like, "Why do you think that?" And that's one of the big things with social media is the unrealistic beauty standards that are set. And again,
Sanitize.
there's no longer a beauty standard. It's do you have good parts for sexual activities? Basically, is like the beauty standard is
Right.
sexualization nowadays, unfortunately. And so a lot of women feel like if they're not this skinny, busty woman, they're worthless. They're ugly. So it's
Mhm.
awful. But I was gonna say I'm Captain Save a Single Mom. Because
Captain Save
a
a
lot of
what?
time Captain Save a Single Mom.
Yep, it happens all
But
the
here's the
time.
thing is because I was had such a bad relationship with my father and I was closer with my mom and my sisters, which my relationship with my mom is all over the place, but I was especially close with my sisters, right? And so I always cared a lot about women. And so the idea of a single mom to me was always the man's fault. And there's a lot of that blaming in our society. Of course, court and social media are pretty against men, and there are plenty of bad men out there. I'm not going to vouch for all men, but there's plenty
And
of
more.
great single fathers. There's plenty of husbands who,
Mhm.
there's a I found out not all single moms are single moms because their husband was in the wrong. I found out that there are some women who aren't motherly or wifey material at the time, right? That doesn't mean forever.
Right.
And so some of the single moms, I was like, I got to be the guy that stepped up. And then I realized it wasn't the guy's fault. It's them, and I can't change them. And unfortunately, for me, it's like I can be an example of I thought I had to be an example of what a good father and husband was, but I realized they need an example of what a good mother is, which is something I can't provide other than like, oh wow, look at how he is as a stepfather, he's my boyfriend, so he's kind of your dad situation. Is like this
Right.
is this is a good way to parent, but I can't show a woman how to be a wife or a mother truly.
Right.
And I didn't realize that until you just said Captain Save a Ho. But so I learned
And by
something
the
new
way,
today.
Captain Save a Ho, ho is not a derogatory remark there. It's a joke between myself and friends that we're like, girl, quit trying to save them. Quit trying to save them, right? We can't save them. And we throw ourselves on the sword trying to save other people. And what that is a wound in us that we need to search the wound in us that makes us want to save other people. Because it's easier to
Yeah.
go out than it is to go in.
Well, and my mother always harps on me because she's like, you're doing exactly what I did in my relationships. I was with your father because I always thought, we'll get him back, but who he presented isn't who he is, when they first met. And she just says, my mother feels like she gave all herself away, not just to him, but to everyone, people
On how many
pleasing.
people are? How many people
Right.
are their true self, especially with swiping right or whatever the hell it is. I've never used it, but especially with the way the dating scene
The
is, it's
world
all
is,
a mask,
yeah.
right? And then
Yeah, I
people
know.
jump in the sack so fast they don't know who they're even sleeping with, right?
Right. And
It's
well, people are focused on the wrong thing too. I know there was someone from Gen Z, a woman who posted like you had to fill out this application before you date me. And if you look at it, it's like how much money are you making, travel, this and that. But that's never gonna tell you a person's personality or their intentions. You can worry about money, you can worry about height, but that's not what's important, right? And of course, I know women don't just care about height or money, but most women do. That's an important factor. But it's like, well, where are their true intentions? Who are they really. And like you said, with the virtual stuff, it's so easy to put on that facade, that mask. And
It's
even
what are your values?
yeah.
What is your value system?
And part of the issue is a lot of the younger generations don't respect intimacy in the bedroom. So they will sleep with someone on the first date, that's someone who they think it is, and then get bonded because sex is a bonding thing. I know that it's been desensitized a lot, and a lot of people have
Mhm.
desensitized themselves. Can't say that word, desensitized themselves
You just did.
through pornographic. Thank you. Thank you. I've grown
You're
every
welcome.
day. But through pornography, through social media, they manage to because again our brains and bodies are connected. So if you take away the value of sex, it can impact its chemical bonding with you. But at the end of the day, it's still bonding. So women and men are saying, "Hey, this person seems great." Sleeping with them, start seeing them, and then they unravel who they really are. But that by that point, it's too late because you're in that sexual bondage, that emotional bondage, and then from there it develops into, like we said, the financial bondage or whatever it
And it's
is.
not too late. It's just harder to deal with. It's
Right.
not too late.
Uh,
Never
but
too late.
we could avoid all of this if people
Yes.
actually spent more time getting to know each other. But with the dating apps, it's never we're gonna be friends first. It's mostly like first date. We've texted a little bit, like I know who you are. We're a thing. We're dating.
Yep.
And you know what, I can't really preach because I've never been friends with any of my partners. It was we texted, maybe FaceTime, but typically just texted a bit, went on a date and next thing you know, we're leaving the restaurant, boyfriend and girlfriend. And I have been in awful relationships because of that. So I'm warning y'all, like, you have to actually take the time to get to know someone. But we live in such a fast-paced, impatient, no attention span, instant gratification world. And so people aren't taking that time. But look at the headaches that follow. So that's what I'm going to
Here's
preach.
one for you. How about an
Yeah.
alcoholic with wounds, right? How many of us just go into a bar, get wasted, and get laid?
Mm,
Right? And it's just a repetitive cycle. And there's either a million one night stands, or suddenly you're in love with a person you can't remember their name because you were blackout drunk, right?
yeah.
And uh Reba McEntire even did a song like that. It's called I Think His Name is John. She doesn't even remember the guy's name, right? And there's a few of those. I think Carrie Underwood did a song about it too. And it's substance abuse is huge in PTSD, and the military breeds it too, right? And between PTSD and domestic and the military and everything else, substance abuse is a coping mechanism, and sex is sometimes that substance, right? It could be
Yeah.
shopping, it could be OCD, it could be hoarding, it could go any
Yeah.
direction. Anything that
Yeah.
you cling on to cope is your addiction. It's your vice. And I've ended up becoming an impromptu addictions counselor because of all this, right? And what I've realized in my own personal thing, I mean, some people call addictions a disease. I understand that we're genetically predisposed to some things, right? But on the flip side of that, my personal opinion is that addictions are not the problem, they're the symptom. They're
Yep.
the symptom of the problem. If we take care of the codependency and we take care of healing these wounds, the addictions go away. You wouldn't believe how many women I've worked with who had massive other addictions going on and they couldn't figure out what was going on, and they solved these other issues of their wounds and their identity, and filling those holes in, right? Because that's what codependency is trying to fill that damn hole that you don't know what is even there. And when we take people out of it, we put substances in it. So so many of them have cured their own addictions because they've healed their codependency. It's just another codependency. So
All right.
I'm passionate about this. I just went off the rails a little bit.
No, that was perfect. Actually, you addressed something that I talk about a lot, which is
Hmm.
negative de-stressors, such as sex being used not as an intimate thing, but to get out anger and sorrow to escape the world. A lot of military members do that. People always joke, sailors go to Japan and sleep with all the Asian women, and like people don't say, well, why is that? And they're like, oh, they're just horny from deployment. I mean, sure, that's one part of it, but another part of it is an escape, right? Because sex kind of takes you into its own little world. but sleeping and bed rot, that is a huge thing from the younger generations, and it's a huge thing for the military. I know plenty of military members who, if they don't go home and just drink until they black out, they'll just sleep. Their free time is just sleep. They're just always tired and stressed. And it's interesting. What I saw is like, think about it. If you wake up and your brain, your mind is telling your body, it's a dangerous world out there, it's a bad world out there, but we're safe in this bed. Why do you think so many people are tired? And that's why they say it's momentum. The more you do, the more you do, the less you do, the less you want to do. Because
Yep.
you
And
are
what you practice in
furthering,
private, you do in public.
right? You are furthering that your bed is home, it's a safe space. We need to stay there. And you're furthering the idea that the world is dangerous, and that energy deficiency is your body physically trying to anchor you there, because your body can only control you so much. If you're gonna get out of bed, you're gonna get out of bed. But if you wake up, praise the Lord while I breathe, I hope it's another day, and then you go out and get after it, your body's gonna be like, I don't want to stay in this bed. There's so much to chase out there. And I'm gonna encourage y'all to have that mindset, to have a spirit of appreciation. And if you need more help on that, shameless plug, I have an episode from the Lone Sailor series, Combating Chaos with a Spirit of Appreciation, where I talk about that. And what I'll share from that is, well, Mr. Whiskey, it's so hard. The world is such an awful place. And I said, hold yourself accountable to gratitude. And one way you can do that is, whether it's sticky notes on your desk or a digital log or a journal, if you just write at least one thing you're grateful for each day, you'll feel a bit better. And then you can get to the level where there's two things or three things, or to the level where you don't need to write it. Me, I just share it with God. I'll pray throughout the day. God, thank you that the sun is shining because my dog won't walk in the rain. That's usually what I'm grateful for. But also, I went over in that episode the stats of how many people just killed themselves today, how many people didn't wake up, how many people were born. Every day there is a cycle of life and death going on. And you should be grateful to be alive, because there are hundreds of thousands of people who didn't wake up, and there are even 5 times that many people who were affected by that person's death.
Hmm. And it's all a choice. It is all intention. It's all
Amen.
intention.
Amen.
Yeah, it's gratitude has become a cornerstone for me. It absolutely has because, and like you were saying about family histories and family stories, like that comes back to it's called effective blaming. And you gave a
Mm,
prime example of it earlier. Effective blaming is when if you're going to get mad at somebody for all the bad shit that happened in your life, you have to thank them for the good things too, because your strengths come from your adversities. You don't get
right.
stronger because everything's great. So the worst people in your lives, the worst people in your lives gave you your strongest blessings, right? So you're grinning because
Yeah,
it's
because it's like,
true.
you hate to thank your enemies, it's
You got to thank your enemies because they're the ones that help you grow. Your friends, and really your friends help you grow only if they're the true friends that get in your face when you need somebody in your
yeah.
face, right?
Oh yeah.
Those are your real friends. They're not
And if they leave when you hold them accountable, it shows their character, because I held a shipmate accountable not too long ago for the way he was talking, and he actually
Mm,
thanked me. He said, "Mr. Wishy, you're the first person to hold me accountable out of all my friends." And I said, "It's because I care about you, man. Like we're supposed to help each other grow." EJ Snyder said, "As men, we are called to be a tribe and to help each other, to
yeah.
support one another and to hold each other accountable." And the Bible says it best: gently, hold each other accountable gently but firmly, be courageous and guard yourself that you don't fall into the same sin as them. Because whether it's the Bible or gaslighting or narcissism, a person will try to justify their actions no matter what, especially if that action is controlling you. And so you have to be guarded in spirit and mind, knowing that they're going to try to guilt you, to manipulate you, like you mentioned earlier, like when you find yourself, you also find the people in your life who don't want you to find yourself. And that's
Mm,
because they will guilt you with your past. They will, if you are walking a path of redemption, people who are still sinning or whatever it is, whether you're religious or not, they're gonna try to bring up all the past and make you feel like you are not able to complete that path of redemption, that you'll never be worthy enough. And maybe
right.
if it's not a redemption path with God and the Bible, maybe it's a a new life as a single man or woman, a more independent, boundary-filled, respectful relationship with family members or friends.
And the truth of what that is projection, because what they're saying is, oh, if you think you're worth enough to leave me, then that must mean that I'm not worthy enough to have you. And then they are stuck with themselves. That's the truth of that, right? So I'm going to keep beating you down so that I could keep telling you you're not good enough to stay or to get you to stay so that I don't have to feel like I'm not good enough if you leave. That's what that actually means, right? It's a projection from them onto you. And then as Captain Save a Hose, us people pleasers, we're like, oh no, you're totally worth it. Let me show you how worthy you are. And then we just put ourselves right back into the cycle. And they're like, oh, good. I'm so glad you
Well,
think I'm worthy again. Let me love bomb you.
and you know what else it is? It is because of all the broken people in the world find these people who they think need saving because they have low self-confidence. They're like, all right, so this person with all these issues is easy to be
Well,
with,
it's
There's a lot
subconscious,
of
right?
reassurance too, right? It's like, hey, he's mean to me, but could I actually have anyone else? And that's one that can come from manipulation and gaslighting from your partner. But two, it's because of social media. You have these unrealistic standards. You're in like, well, this guy must or a woman must be the best I can do, and they're right. They said I can't do better, and I can't. It's just hard out there. So
You could do whatever you if you tell yourself you can't, you can't, right? Well, and it's like
yeah,
with my videos or any of the things I do, everything's raw video. I don't edit anything. My stuff is not clean, it's not sanitized. Like the if the dog barking and everything else, I laugh about it. I'm like, y'all, it's real life. What do you want? And the standard for social media is like, you got 5 seconds of a dog barking in the middle of your interview. How dare you? And I'm like, no, there's a damn dog barking. Get over it. Right? It's been 45 minutes and nobody ever thought about that dog again until I brought it up again. Right?
yep,
It's not that big a deal. And it's actually a huge deal to show people that being authentic is where it's at. Because I don't have to worry about anything. I just show up and live my life and then move on. I don't have to worry about what I said. I don't have to worry about if I told the truth or nobody, if somebody's going to believe it or what story I have to keep up in whatever venue I'm
yep.
in.
Nothing more difficult than
Life
keeping
is
track
so
of
easy.
multiple lies. Yeah,
Yeah. It just and people pleasers, they'll learn it once they start finding their own authenticity because in order to keep constantly please other people, you have to constantly give up who you
who
are
you are.
because you're fitting their mold, not yours.
Yep.
Life gets
Wow.
so much easier. Oh, we so have to do this again.
Yeah, I was gonna say, so ladies and gentlemen, in the description below for this episode, as well as on my website, you will find Ms. Whiskey Lynn's picture and all the links to her stuff. But Ms. Whiskey, if you could share with us also how to reach out to you and what services you offer for us. And we'll definitely have you back when your book comes out, of course. But if we're someone who wants some relationship advice right now, how can we reach out to you?
Well, I am Whiskey Lynn on Facebook, and actually, I don't charge for my coaching at this point. It's all free and whatever you find on the internet. And then I help people as they reach out or, different things like that. God brings me the people who I work with. I don't actually schedule coaching or anything right now. So Whiskey
Amen.
Lynn with an E, both with an E on Facebook is my public figure page. That's me. And then I just launched yesterday, as a matter of fact,
Woo!
whiskeylynn.life. Whiskeylynn.life is my website, and we can actually talk about this on a different episode if you want, because it's going to be a little bit more involved. But I'm doing a 10,000-mile motorcycle challenge in August, and I'm riding,
Wow.
yeah, it's in 2 to 3 weeks of
Is it from
riding nonstop, riding from Key West, Florida to Homer, Alaska. I have to sleep with the bike, no electronic GPS, no nothing. It's just a huge, huge deal. It's an elite endurance challenge.
I
So
was gonna say you kind of already did it unofficially when you were homeless with your bike.
all
I was gonna say
last
you're trained for this. This is easy. This
yeah,
is nothing.
all last year I was like, this is great training for Hokahay. This is great training for Hokahay. Because there's a few times last year I was like, I am so gonna die right now. I didn't, obviously. And I had to change my mindset, right? So instead of, oh shit, I'm going to die, it turned into, this is great training for this event. So
Wow. I'd rather
yeah,
go from Alaska to Florida, be like it gets nicer along the way. It's getting colder and colder. It's getting a
it's going to
little
go really,
nasty.
really hot to really, really cold. So
Yeah. I'd
yeah,
rather go from cold to hot, me personally, but that's just me. Like you end up in the beach, it's like, all right, I'm gonna go take a suntanning nap on the beach now after all that. And
yeah.
you're gonna be like stargazing, making snow angels, I guess.
And there's no expressways. It's all two-lane back roads and through
Oh,
Indian
that's nice.
reservation. Yeah, through Indian
You're gonna see some
reservations,
nice
all
stuff.
kinds of things.
You'll
Yeah, so
probably get
that
to
one
see
is
some
with
really cool stuff.
whiskey.lynn.life, and that's my like, what's the word? I yeah, it's just my website, and it's going to have information on there and ways to support
Mm.
me. And I would love to come back and talk about that more in detail too.
Yeah, of course. We'd love to. I assume you're going to be posting photos and videos to keep us all updated along your journey.
There's a whole thing being
Yeah.
worked out and mapped out right now. A lot of people have 2 years to plan for this. By the time I was on a wait list, I was number 27 when I signed up, and I just got off the wait list last week, and I have 2.5 months to be conditioned, raise the money, get everything done, and be on the road.
Heck
So
yeah. And
yeah,
knowing God's great will and plan, you're probably going to meet people along the way who need to hear what you have to say. So hopefully you get
it,
to
this is
and
my
change and
ministry.
inspire some lives on the way too.
Absolutely. So
All
we will
right.
totally come back and talk about that.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. It's been a pleasure. We had a lot of great information for our listeners, so I hope this really helps someone.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.